Usually when you walk down a city street, there is um, this fundamental expectation of solidity.
Right, like the physical world is just a given.
Exactly. You lean against a brick building and you fully expect it to hold your weight. It's structural. You don't even think about it.
Because it's tangible. I mean, we orient our entire lives around the assumption that the structures around us are, real.
But then imagine you lean against that brick wall and it just yields. It falls completely over.
Oh,
Yeah,
man.
because you suddenly realize it's not actually a wall. It's like a movie set. It's painted cardboard propped up by cheap 2x4s.
Which is a terrifying feeling, honestly.
Right. Suddenly the camera pulls back and you realize the whole street, maybe the entire city you live in,
Yeah.
is just this incredibly elaborate facade.
That is, that's perhaps the most accurate metaphor for our current cultural and economic moment.
You really think so?
I do. We are basically walking through a landscape of structural illusions. We assume they are load-bearing, only to find out they are completely hollow.
Hollow. Wow. Well, welcome to your custom-tailored deep dive. We have a completely fascinating mission today. We've been handed a massive and, frankly, wildly diverse stack of sources to analyze for you.
Yeah, diverse is an understatement.
I mean, it looks like someone dropped a library card catalog on the floor. We have historical deep dives into 18th century financial bubbles, accounts from CIA whistleblowers.
Which is wild, by the way.
Totally. Plus sociological data on the modern happiness gap, theological debates on church governance, and the military history of the Dutch House of Orange.
And it looks like a completely disjointed reading list at first glance. If you just read the titles, you would really wonder how these things could possibly relate to one another.
But when you actually sit down and read through all of these sources, they all point to one massive, undeniable theme.
Right.
We are navigating an age of illusions and systemic scams. And the central challenge of our time is figuring out how to, pierce through that fake reality to build something authentically real. So our focus today is to synthesize these sources for you, pull out the key ideas, and provide concrete, actionable steps for you to reclaim your agency. We will reference a few channels sparingly, but the focus is really on the ideas.
Because in a world suffering from severe information overload, your ability to spot these patterns and connect the dots is, well, it's your greatest defense.
Yeah.
When the world is aggressively throwing disjointed data at you, synthesis is your shield.
I love that. Synthesis is your shield. So where do we even begin to unpack this? I mean, when the entire world feels fabricated, where's the first place we should look?
We should start where the illusion is the most quantifiable, the place it's universally felt.
Which is?
The economy. Because we're currently living in an era where the concept of value has literally detached from reality. We are operating inside what commentator Cole Hastings calls the scam economy.
The scam economy. That sounds intense.
It is. But to truly understand the mechanics of this, we need to go back in time. The mechanics of a scam rarely change, Only the technology accelerates.
All right, the tools get better.
Exactly. So we need to look at the year 1720 and the infamous South Sea Company bubble.
Oh man, let's get into the history here because this blew my mind when I was reading the source. So in 1720, the British government was drowning in massive national debt from various wars.
Just completely underwater.
Yeah. So they hatched a plan. They backed a joint stock company called the South Sea Company. They essentially allowed this company to assume the national debt, and in exchange, the government granted them a trading monopoly in the Americas.
Specifically focusing on the highly profitable, albeit brutal, slave trade of the era.
Right. So the pitch to the public was incredibly enticing. They promised hungry investors a guaranteed 6% interest rate.
Which sounded like an absolute certainty because it had the backing of the British crown.
Exactly. But there was a fatal flaw in the physical reality of the plan. The massive trade explosion they predicted, it never materialized.
No, not at all.
Spain controlled those waters. They severely limited the South Sea Company's trade, and they took a massive cut of whatever meager profits were actually made. Fundamentally, the underlying business was a total failure.
But the stock price didn't reflect that failure at all.
Not even a little bit. In fact, it skyrocketed. How does a failing company become the most valuable stock in the world?
Well, it happened because the British government and even the king himself stepped in to keep the illusion alive.
Right, the king was involved.
Oh, yeah. They started trading massive amounts of their own stock. Company directors were literally bribing members of parliament with shares just to artificially inflate the price and keep the hype cycle spinning.
So they were just handing out shares to politicians to keep the whole thing afloat.
Yes. It became a pure psychological feedback loop. People weren't buying the stock because the company was, actually moving goods.
Right.
They were buying the stock because their neighbor bought the stock and got rich yesterday. It soared to the equivalent of hundreds of thousands of dollars today.
That is just insane. And didn't Isaac Newton get caught up in this?
He did. Isaac Newton, arguably one of the most brilliant analytical minds in human history, threw his fortune into this stock.
Wow.
He initially made money, sold, watched it keep going up, and then bought back in at the peak.
Oh,
And he lost almost everything. He famously muttered that he could calculate the motions of the heavenly bodies, but not the madness of the people.
That is such a profound quote. But inevitably, gravity took over. Right?
Yeah, the mirage crashed, the bubble burst, the stock plummeted, and there was widespread catastrophic financial ruin across England.
See, you look at that history and you think, wow, people in the 1700s were so remarkably gullible. Like, how could they not see it was a house of cards?
Right, we judge them so harshly.
But then you open up a modern brokerage app on your phone.
And you realize we have built the exact same architecture, just on a frictionless digital scale.
Yeah.
Historically, when you bought a stock, let's say you were investing in an early 19th century railroad company,
Okay.
you were funding a productive asset. Your money bought physical steel, it paid wages to lay physical tracks, and it facilitated the movement of actual grain or coal.
So it was real stuff.
Real stuff. And because the company made real, tangible profits from moving those physical goods, they paid you a dividend. Your wealth was inextricably tethered to a tangible reality that actually benefited society.
Right. But today, however, thanks to zero-commission trading apps and algorithmic hype, the stock market has essentially been gamified. It's like a giant decentralized casino.
It really is.
The clearest example from our source material is the meme stock phenomenon, specifically what happened with GameStop.
GameStop is the perfect modern parallel to the South Sea bubble.
It really is. The situation was entirely driven by a narrative constructed on the Reddit forum Wall Street Bets. Let's break down the mechanics here.
Sure.
So, hedge funds had aggressively shorted GameStop's stock. And just to clarify, shorting means they borrowed shares they didn't own, sold them at the current price, and planned to buy them back later when the price dropped.
Right, to return them to the lender and pocket the difference.
Exactly. And they made this bet because, fundamentally, GameStop was a failing brick-and-mortar retail business. I mean, they're trying to survive in an era where everyone just downloads video games directly to their consoles.
The underlying physical reality was that the business was dying.
Yeah, but the internet investors on Reddit realized that if they coordinated a massive buying spree, they could force the stock price to skyrocket.
Which triggers a short squeeze.
Yes. The hedge funds, facing infinite losses as the price climbed, would be forced to buy back the stock at astronomical prices just to cover their original bets, which would just drive the price even higher.
And it worked. The stock shot up over 1,500% in a matter of weeks.
1,500%.
It was a fascinating display of collective action. But as Hastings points out in his analysis, absolutely nothing about GameStop's actual business model changed during that time.
They didn't invent a new product.
No, they weren't suddenly selling more games. Their balance sheet was still terrible. The only thing that changed was the story surrounding the stock.
The valuation became entirely detached from reality.
And this detachment is the defining architecture of the scam economy. We see the exact same mechanics in the venture capital exit model, too.
Oh, like with Uber or WeWork? We briefly touched on this in the research.
Yeah. The goal of these companies wasn't necessarily to build a profitable, sustainable business from day one. The goal was something called blitzscaling.
Right, blitzscaling. Explain how that works.
It relies on massive influxes of venture capital to subsidize the product. So Uber, for years, lost money on almost every ride because venture capitalists were effectively paying a portion of your fare.
Just to ensure Uber could crush the traditional taxi industry and get a monopoly.
Exactly. The goal is to build massive hype, achieve a stratospheric valuation on paper, and then take the company public through an IPO.
So they can cash out.
Right. It allows the founders and the early private investors to cash out, dumping the inflated stock onto everyday retail investors before the reality of the terrible balance sheet catches up with the narrative.
Wow. And we are seeing the exact same pattern right now with the current AI tech bubble, aren't we?
We absolutely are. It is about selling the hype, not the product.
It's just the absolute gamification of everything. Hastings points to prediction markets to illustrate this. There is a platform called Kelshi, where the CEO's literal stated goal is to financialize everything.
Financialize everything. Just think about that phrase.
It's wild. You can go on these sites and bet real currency on completely abstract concepts. Like you can bet on how many times a political pundit will say a specific buzzword during a debate, or what the exact price of soybeans will be next Thursday at noon.
It reduces all human endeavor, all physical supply chains, and all social interaction to pure, sterile speculation. It turns life into a derivative.
And this illusion bleeds into everything, even things that seem incredibly mundane or incredibly complex. We had a couple of minor sources in our stack that perfectly illustrate how pervasive this is.
Oh, the recycling one.
Yes. David Achu did a deep dive analysis on plastic recycling. We all dutifully sort our plastics, assuming there is a structural system handling it. But Achu concluded that the whole system is largely a mirage.
A total mirage.
Because whenever you ask a recycling facility why a certain plastic isn't actually being recycled, the answer is never about environmental impact. The answer is either technically we can't melt this polymer, or more often the money doesn't make sense.
It's cheaper to make virgin plastic.
Exactly. The recycling bin is just an economic illusion to make consumers feel better about consumption.
Or look at global finance, the absolute highest level of the economy. We reviewed an analysis from a channel called Heresy Financial, detailing how the government uses complex financial instruments called treasury swap lines.
Let's actually explain how those work, because it sounds like pure jargon. What is a treasury swap line, and why does it matter?
Simply put, a swap line is an agreement between two central banks to exchange currencies. Let's say European banks are desperate for US dollars to pay their debts, but there is a dollar shortage.
Oh.
If they default, the global market panics. So the U.S. Federal Reserve steps in. They give the European Central Bank newly created dollars, and in exchange, they take euros as collateral.
Oh, I see.
Then the European Central Bank lends those dollars to its local banks to keep them afloat. It quietly stabilizes foreign markets and protects the dominance of the U.S. dollar.
Without the Federal Reserve having to explicitly announce to the American public that they are bailing out foreign banks.
Exactly. It is brilliant financial engineering, but it happens entirely behind a curtain. It keeps the illusion of absolute stability alive through invisible mechanisms.
But wait, let me push back a little here. Let's look at the other side of this for a second. Isn't all investing fundamentally a gamble?
How do you mean?
Well, whether you're buying an 1800s railroad or a 2024 AI startup, you never actually know if a company is going to succeed. So why are we calling this specific era a scam economy when financial risk has existed since the dawn of commerce?
That is a really crucial distinction we have to make. All investment carries inherent risk, yes. But investing in a productive asset means you are taking a risk on the reality of a product or service finding a physical market.
Right. You're betting people want to ride the train.
Right. In the scam economy, you are not betting on utility. You are taking a risk purely on whether or not you can convince someone else to buy into an illusion for more money than you paid for it.
I get it. The greater fool theory.
Digitized. It's what the philosopher Mathieu Pizot calls participating in a subtle medium. It acts like a mirror. It has no substance of its own.
That makes sense.
And this is uniquely devastating to younger generations. As Hastings notes, this hyper-speculative, overnight crypto-millionaire environment is the only economy Generation Z has ever known.
That is so sad to think about.
When the entire system signals that producing actual value is for suckers and financial engineering is the only way to survive, it breeds profound cultural nihilism.
So if you are listening to this right now, and you are feeling that exact nihilism creeping in, what do you actually do? What are the actionable steps to protect yourself from the scam economy?
You need to build a defense.
Right. First, you need to deliberately inject friction between yourself and speculation. If you feel the sudden, urgent urge to buy into a hype stock, the new cryptocurrency, or some overpriced online course promising passive income, force yourself to wait a full 24 hours.
Just let the emotional urgency evaporate. Scams rely on false urgency.
Yes, exactly. Second, automate your investments and walk away. Put your money into broad, unexciting index funds. Remove your day-to-day emotions and your desire to beat the market from the equation entirely.
You want your wealth tied to the broader, slow-moving productivity of the entire market, not the dopamine hit of the casino.
Well said. And third, ruthlessly limit your consumption of opportunity content.
Mhm.
If your social media feed is an endless scrolling stream of how to get rich quick videos, top 5 side hustles, and finance gurus flexing rented sports cars.
You are willingly swimming in a stream of scams.
Yeah, specifically designed to harvest your attention and eventually your wallet. Unfollow them.
Which perfectly transitions us into the next major theme of our sources.
Right.
Because this deliberate detachment from reality isn't just happening in our investment portfolios.
Where else is it happening?
It is actively, systematically being engineered into our information ecosystem.
Oh, this is where things get genuinely fascinating. We're looking at a deep interview with the symbolic thinker, Mathieu Peugeot, featured on the Anthony Westgate channel.
Peugeot has such a unique perspective.
He really does. He analyzes how information, and specifically modern algorithms and artificial intelligence, are being weaponized as tools of subversion. He uses a very specific, intense term for this. He calls it a satanic parody.
It is a profound philosophical concept. And it's important to clarify, Peugeot isn't using the term in a horror movie sense.
Right, no jump scares here.
Exactly. In symbolic thinking, a satanic parody is when a system creates a fake, parodic version of reality that mimics the truth just closely enough to be believable.
Okay, so it looks like the real thing.
It does. It conflates the fake with the real, allows the fake version to draw all the attacks, outrage, and attention, and ultimately uses the resulting confusion to undermine and destroy objective truth itself. AI is the ultimate modern manifestation of this subtle medium.
Peugeot points out that AI is currently being aggressively positioned by tech companies as the ultimate unbiased fact-checker.
Which is a huge shift.
Yeah, I mean, during the recent pandemic, society was heavily conditioned to accept the concept of omnipresent top-down fact-checking. Now, that entire infrastructure of truth arbitration is being handed over to algorithmic black boxes.
It is preparing us to accept algorithmic truth over objective reality.
And to be fair to the technology, it is incredibly potent. We had a short clip in our sources from the physicist Sabine Hossenfelder that blew my mind.
Oh, I loved that part. Yes, Hossenfelder discussed a recent scenario where an AI tool was used to review a highly complex quantum physics research paper.
Right. The paper involved incredibly dense tensor calculations, math so complex that human peer reviewers often just have to trust the overarching logic because verifying every single integer would take weeks.
But the AI scanned the document and found subtle, cascading mathematical errors in seconds.
Seconds. Errors that took human experts over an hour to manually verify once the AI pointed them out. The sheer processing power is undeniable.
Undeniable, but that power is exactly what makes its potential to control and filter human information so incredibly dangerous.
Oh, so?
Because the primary danger isn't necessarily that the AI or the algorithm will explicitly lie to us, though it certainly can. The deeper danger is that it muddies the waters so entirely that truth becomes functionally indistinguishable from fiction. Peugeot uses the release of the Epstein files as a prime example of this deliberate algorithmic muddying.
Oh, this was such a brilliant breakdown. When the Epstein files finally dropped, the public expected this massive, clarifying moment of justice. But the files were just a massive, uncurated data dump. They acted exactly like a mirror, which is the definition of a subtle medium.
Exactly. Because the files were full of highly coded language, flight logs without context, and completely decontextualized email fragments.
So what happened?
People only saw what their algorithms had already trained them to look for. The political left scoured thousands of pages looking for any tangential connection that implicated Donald Trump.
And the right did the exact same thing.
Right. The political right scoured the exact same thousands of pages looking for liberal Hollywood celebrities or politicians. Everyone used the raw data to perfectly validate their pre-existing worldview.
Meanwhile, the actual boring, complex truth of the financial corruption and international blackmail operations remained completely obscured by the partisan noise.
It is exactly like a stage magician's misdirection.
That's a great way to put it. While we are all furiously arguing in the comment sections over the shiny, polarizing object they're waving in their left hand, the establishment is quietly picking our pocket with their right.
Yes. And Peugeot pointed out a hilarious but terrifying example of this from the Epstein saga.
Oh, the bail thing.
Yes. A massive viral rumor spread across social media claiming that Epstein had a secret offshore bank account explicitly named Bail, spelled B-A-I-L.
People thought it was this huge, arrogant, hidden in plain sight conspiracy by the elites.
And what was the actual physical reality of that Bail account?
It turned out it was literally just an OCR scanning error. Optical character recognition. When the government scanned the old physical bank statements into digital PDFs, the software misread the pixels.
It was just the word balance.
Yes, it was just the word balance, but the edge of the page cut off the rest of the letters, leaving what looked like bail. That's it, a software glitch.
But the algorithm didn't care about the truth.
No, it cared about engagement. It promoted the outrage to millions of people, because outrage keeps you on the platform.
And this tactic of using noise and misdirection to manage public perception is standard operating procedure at the highest levels of intelligence.
We see this explicitly confirmed in the interview from our stack between commentator Jay Dyer and John Kiriakou.
A former CIA officer and actual whistleblower.
Kiriakou debunks so many deeply held historical myths in that interview. For instance, he brought up the infamous MK-Ultra mind control experiments from the Cold War.
Right, the stuff of movies.
Yeah, the standard socially acceptable historical excuse we are always taught is, well, it was a dark time, but the CIA only did it because they had intelligence that the Soviets were developing mind control and we had to keep up.
Kiriakou states that is a completely flimsy, retroactive justification.
It was totally made up.
The physical reality was that the Soviets weren't doing it. The Chinese were experimenting with basic psychological conditioning, but the U.S. had virtually no reliable assets in China at the time to even know about it.
So why did they do it?
The reality of MKUltra was remarkably banal and terrifying. The CIA initiated those programs simply because a Swiss chemist named Albert Hofmann invented LSD. The agency realized it was a powerful psychoactive compound, and they wanted to play with it to see if they could use it for interrogations.
Wow. So the Soviet mind control threat was just a cover story.
It was just the convenient narrative frame they used to justify the budget and the ethics violations to the oversight committees.
That is chilling. Furthermore, both Kiriakou and Pagou touch on a very modern phenomenon that ties into this. UFO disclosures.
Oh, this is a fascinating angle.
Right. For decades, the government aggressively denied the existence of unidentified aerial phenomena. Now, suddenly, they are releasing Navy jet footage to the New York Times and having congressional hearings about non-human biologics.
Which naturally makes you ask, why now?
Exactly. Pagou suggests is a fascinating psychological mechanism. He argues it is a tactic to regain the attention and trust of dissidents.
It is a brilliant strategy of narrative recapture. Think about it. If a significant portion of your population deeply distrusts the government and institutional media, how do you get them back under your influence?
You give them what they want.
You release a carefully curated drip of forbidden knowledge. By validating the conspiracy theorists just a little bit, the establishment wins back the attention of the very people who distrust them the most. They bring the dissidents back into the fold of the managed narrative.
So what on earth do we do about this? I mean, if the economy is a scam, if the intelligence agencies are constantly framing the narrative, and if algorithms are actively muddying the truth, how do you practically live your life without going crazy?
Pagou brings up a philosophy he calls the circle punch game.
Oh man, do you remember playing that game in middle school?
I do, unfortunately.
Where a kid makes a circle with their thumb and index finger below their waist, and if you accidentally look at it, they get to punch you in the arm.
It is a juvenile game, but it serves as a profound metaphor for our modern engagement with algorithmic media.
It really does. The rule of the game is, if you look at the circle, you get punched. But here's the psychological trick Pagou points out. Let's say your friend makes the circle. You look at it, but you realize what they're doing. So you point at their hand and you yell, huh, that's a fake circle. I know you're trying to trick me. That circle is a psyop.
It doesn't matter.
Yeah, exactly. It doesn't matter at all. You still played the game. You acknowledged the circle, you gave it your attention, and you still get punched in the arm.
Pagou argues that by constantly engaging with fake news, reacting to algorithmic outrage, and spending all of our mental energy writing huge threads debunking the latest media distraction, we are actually giving these fake systems their power.
We are the battery supplying the energy to the subtle medium.
Therefore, the actionable steps for you as a listener require a radical shift in how you process information.
What's the first step?
First, when you see a sensational news story, a leaked document, or a sudden government disclosure, you must train yourself to stop merely asking, is this true?
Because that's the wrong first question.
Right. You must start asking, why is this relevant to my actual life, and why are the algorithms choosing to show this to me right now? You have to recognize that the true manipulation happens at the level of the framing and the timing, not just in the falsification of facts.
And the second step is even harder, but it is vital for your sanity. Stop playing the circle punch game.
Just stop playing.
When you recognize that a narrative is an obvious distraction or a piece of rage bait, just stop engaging with it completely. Do not hate watch the video. Do not share it with a caption saying, "Can you believe this?"
Do not spend an hour researching it to debunk it in the comments.
Do not let the algorithm harvest your finite attention. Just look away, turn your phone off, and go focus your energy on what you actually know to be true and physical in your own life.
Which brings us to a profound, unavoidable cultural consequence. When a population slowly wakes up and realizes that the economy is a speculative casino, and they realize the information ecosystem is a digital hall of mirrors designed to harvest their anger, they are left with a deep, agonizing void of meaning.
They feel completely unmoored.
And human beings cannot survive in a vacuum of meaning.
We are meaning-making machines. If the old structures fail, we will desperately build new ones. Which brings us to the next major theme in our sources: how we search for meaning in an age of false idols.
Right. Because when traditional civic and religious structures collapse, we start attaching absolute, ultimate significance to modern manufactured mythologies.
A fascinating example of this psychological shift comes from a source video by commentator David Stewart, who analyzes the cultural reaction to the Star Wars sequel trilogy.
Now, on the surface, this just sounds like nerdy movie critique.
Yeah, you'd think it's just fanboy stuff.
But Stewart makes a deeply compelling sociological argument that modern pop culture franchises have essentially evolved into substitute religions for millions of secularized people.
The passion really proves the point. Think about the absolute vitriolic fury that surrounded movies like The Last Jedi. Fans didn't just casually dislike the film because of pacing issues or bad dialogue.
No, they reacted with the exact same emotional intensity as if a sacred, holy text had been intentionally desecrated by a heretic.
Yes, Stewart points out something incredible. Fans constantly argue about what is considered canon in the Star Wars universe. They want a strict, unbreakable set of rules.
And canon is literally a theological term.
Is it really?
Yes, it originated with the early Christian church councils, like the Council of Nicaea, determining which specific historical texts were divinely inspired and which were apocryphal.
Oh, wow, I didn't know that.
So when modern fans demand a strict canon for a fictional universe, they are demonstrating a deep, suppressed religious impulse.
Because they lack a cohesive metaphysical framework in their real lives.
Exactly. They demand that a corporate-owned sci-fi universe provide them with perfect, unbroken structural integrity. They have formed a religious attachment to a fictional galaxy.
And this desire for the feeling of religious attachment without any of the actual substance or demands of genuine religion is perfectly encapsulated by another source we reviewed. We looked at an analysis of the writings of the late Eastern Orthodox monk, Seraphim Rose.
Rose is fascinating. Decades ago, long before the internet, Rose wrote prophetically about what he called the religion of the future.
It is a heavy, challenging concept. Rose observed the cultural shifts of the late 20th century and argued that seemingly disparate, disconnected trends were actually all feeding into the exact same philosophical stream.
What kind of trends?
He pointed to the explosion of secular mindfulness apps, the mainstreaming of physical yoga stripped of its Hindu theology, the rise of hyper-emotional, charismatic stadium revivals in Christianity, and vague interfaith spiritualism.
He argued that what unites all of these things is a singular desire.
Right. Modern people are desperate for a spiritual experience. They want the emotional elevation, the peace, the sense of connection to the divine.
But they want it completely stripped of any rigid dogma.
Exactly. Any requirement for deep repentance, any moral transformation, or any concept of bearing a cross or suffering.
It is the desire for the warm feeling of the divine, without the strict demands of the divine. It is spirituality optimized for the modern consumer.
You get the emotional high, but you retain complete personal autonomy.
It is the exact same psychological mechanism as the Star Wars fandom.
Yeah, it totally is. We desperately want to feel the epic, transcendent weight of a cosmic battle between absolute good and absolute evil. But we want to consume it safely from our couch while paying a Disney subscription.
We want the aesthetic of profound meaning without the actual sacrifice required to attain it.
We even saw this briefly highlighted in another minor source regarding the high-end art world.
Yes, a channel discussing the Venice Biennale, which is one of the most prestigious art exhibitions in the world.
The analysis pointed out how the elite art world has completely insulated itself from normal human experience, actively waging what the creator called a war on beauty.
A war on beauty.
Yeah. Historically, art was meant to elevate the soul, to capture a glimpse of transcendent meaning or divine order. But today, Because the elite institutions have abandoned that transcendent framework, they simply produce ugly, purely shocking, deeply cynical art.
Their only goal is to provoke a visceral, confused reaction from the viewer.
It's all about generating a temporary experience because
Right.
they don't believe there is any underlying substance to portray.
But let's pause and interrogate this critically.
Yeah.
What is inherently wrong with any of this?
Right. Let me play devil's advocate for a moment. Why are we critiquing this? What is the actual harm in deeply loving a movie franchise? Why is it bad to want a cohesive story in a universe you grew up with?
Or, more practically, what is wrong with using a secular mindfulness app on your phone to lower your blood pressure after a stressful day in the scam economy?
Yeah, exactly.
Well, there is absolutely zero harm in enjoying a story, appreciating art, or seeking mental relaxation. Those are good things.
So what's the problem?
The danger arises purely from a misallocation of weight. The danger is when we elevate the mundane to the level of the sacred.
Okay.
When we lack a genuine, robust spiritual foundation, when we don't have a solid brick wall to lean against, we start asking corporate products to hold the weight of our existential dread.
We ask a movie franchise or a wellness app to provide us with ultimate meaning.
And because a corporate product is fundamentally designed to generate quarterly profits, not to offer eternal salvation, it will inevitably collapse under that weight and deeply disappoint you.
Stewart suggests a much healthier reality-based approach. He says we should view these franchises, whether it's Star Wars or Marvel or video games like Mario or Zelda, as a loose, fun assemblage of stories, not as a rigid theology.
Right. If a new movie comes out and it has bad writing, it's just a bad movie.
You can critique it, but it shouldn't shake your existential foundation or cause you to rage on the internet for a week.
So the actionable step for you listening is to conduct a rigorous audit of your emotional investments. Deliberately divest your profound existential attachment from corporate media franchises and political theater.
Treat entertainment as entertainment, not as scripture.
And if you're genuinely feeling that void of meaning, do not try to fill it with algorithmic substitutes. Seek out true, transcendent beauty. Look into authentic, historically grounded spiritual and philosophical traditions that actually demand something of you.
Rather than settling for the hollow, frictionless religion of experience served up by the App Store.
Because eventually, substituting reality with ideology and synthetic experiences hits a hard limit. You can live in a simulated worldview for a long time, but eventually the ideology crashes headfirst into the unforgiving pavement of reality.
Which brings us to the most intense part of our deep dive, the reality check. And before we dive into the specific data, it is vital to explicitly frame our mission here.
Very important.
The sources we are about to discuss deal with deeply personal, highly charged political and demographic realities. We are not here to take a political side, endorse a platform, or tell you how to live your personal life.
Our job is to impartially report the data and the arguments presented in the source material so you can clearly understand the massive sociological patterns they reveal.
Exactly. We are looking at how theoretical, ideological framing shatters when it actually touches the physical ground. Let's start with a fascinating anecdote analyzed by a channel called Richard IV.
It highlights a recent political situation in the UK involving a progressive liberal journalist named Lewis Goodall.
The story is a perfect microcosm of our cultural fracture. Goodall ventures out of his usual highly educated London media circles and travels to what the source describes as deepest, darkest Birmingham.
He goes to interview the local demographic, which happens to be heavily conservative Muslim, ahead of an election.
The journalist approaches the interview trying to apply his standard, liberal, progressive framing. In his worldview, society is divided between the powerful oppressors and the marginalized oppressed.
He assumes that because he is a progressive ally, he and the minority candidate will share a basic worldview based on solidarity against the conservative establishment.
But the physical reality of the situation completely breaks his ideological frame. He sits down with an independent candidate named Ahmed Yaqub.
And what happens?
Almost immediately, the candidate defaults to deeply conservative religious viewpoints, and in this specific instance, openly espouses aggressive anti-Semitic tropes regarding Zionist puppet masters controlling the media.
Wow. And the journalist is visibly, completely shocked.
Yeah, he attempts to moralize to the candidate, trying to pull him back into the accepted bounds of polite secular liberal discourse. But the candidate just brushes him off entirely. He doesn't care about the journalist's secular morality.
The source analysis points out that this is exactly what happens when liberal, secular fantasies collide with deeply rooted, religiously conservative realities.
Right. The theoretical neutrality of the modern liberal system only functions when everyone implicitly agrees to play by the same basic secular rules.
When a demographic simply rejects those underlying rules, the illusion of a unified, cohesive society instantly fractures.
We see a similar, deeply uncomfortable fracture in the raw demographic data regarding the American economy. A source from political commentator Aaron McIntyre makes a stark, unblinking argument.
He posits that the modern American economic engine is quietly, fundamentally fueled by a systemic mentality of child sacrifice.
It is a brutal, provocative phrase. But McIntyre bases his logic on structural numbers. He points out that the United States sees roughly 1.1 million abortions annually.
He argues that our current societal system, our relentless corporate structures, our demand for infinite economic efficiency, and the absolute necessity of dual-income households just to afford a mortgage structurally relies on that number.
His point is that we have, as a society, prioritized high-status careers, absolute economic autonomy, and corporate growth above human life and family formation.
The corporate system requires people to be unburdened, flexible workers above all else. If you are tied down by children, you are less efficient for the machine.
And this societal choice, prioritizing the career and the autonomous self over core historical institutions like marriage and children, is now showing up vividly and tragically in sociological data.
We reviewed a source video from a creator called Patriotic Peach, who analyzed the results of the 2024 American Family Survey.
The data highlights a massive, unprecedented happiness gap between women based on their political and lifestyle choices.
The numbers are genuinely staggering.
They really are. According to the data, 37% of conservative women report being completely satisfied with their lives. That is compared to only 12% of liberal women.
Conservative women in the prime 18 to 40 age bracket are 3 times as likely to report being very satisfied with life.
Conversely, liberal women in that exact same age bracket are over 3 times more likely to report feeling deeply lonely a few times a week or more.
But the crucial part of this research is that it doesn't just stop at the political label. It actually explains the mechanics of why this gap exists.
The researchers found that the political label itself isn't magic.
No, the gap is largely explained by behavior. Marriage and regular religious attendance account for roughly half of this massive happiness divide.
Over 50% of the conservative women in the survey attended church weekly, compared to just 12% of the liberal women.
Furthermore, the conservative women were 20 percentage points more likely to be married.
As the researchers noted, the less integrated you are into physical, demanding core institutions that provide meaning and solidarity, the more vulnerable you are to the atomization and loneliness of the modern world.
And this ties directly into the demographic reality of the modern child-free movement.
The source cites that currently, 52% of women ages 20 to 39 are child-free.
There is a massive, highly visible trend on platforms like TikTok celebrating this status.
Oh yeah, creators bragging about having low stress, more disposable income, and the freedom to travel constantly, often actively demonizing the concept of motherhood as a patriarchal trap that ruins your life.
The source material contrasts this digital celebration with unyielding biological and physiological realities.
While pregnancy and raising children are undeniably taxing and require massive sacrifice, studies consistently show that full-term pregnancies, especially before the age of 30, trigger profound hormonal resets.
Resets that significantly lower a woman's lifetime risk of breast, ovarian, and endometrial cancers.
There are deeply embedded long-term health protections, alongside the profound psychological meaning tied to raising the next generation, that the career-first, autonomy-only cultural narrative entirely omits from the conversation.
But wait, let's step back and look at this objectively.
Okay, sure.
Isn't happiness ultimately subjective? And isn't the decision to have kids or stay single or focus on a career an incredibly personal individual choice?
I mean, yes, of course it is.
Why should we look at individual lifestyle choices as some sort of societal reality check?
Well, because while the choice is deeply personal on an individual level, when you zoom out, the aggregate data reveals an undeniable sociological trajectory.
So what's the trajectory?
The argument presented in the source material is that societies that heavily promote a hyper-individualistic, career-first, you-do-you model as the highest possible good are actively reaping a harvest of record-high loneliness, widespread clinical depression, and massive demographic collapse.
Furthermore, as Orrin McIntyre points out in his analysis, these growing political and demographic divides are not just a matter of one side being mentally ill or brainwashed.
Which is how people on the internet constantly dismiss their opponent.
Right, it's not just a disagreement over tax policy anymore.
Exactly. These divides represent entirely incompatible, fundamental understandings of how the world works. One side views meaning entirely through the lens of individual autonomy, self-creation, and freedom from consequence.
The other side views meaning through the lens of duty, integration into family, and submission to divine or natural order.
And we even see this fundamental fracture playing out on a massive global scale. We had a quick source from the channel Economics Explained, noting how current geopolitical realities reflect this exact incompatibility.
While Western nations get constantly dragged into complex ideological and historical conflicts in the Middle East,
Spending billions and catching strays in wars they don't really know how to resolve.
nations like Russia and China are taking a completely different approach. They largely sit back, actively avoid the messy ideological entanglements, and purely focus on selling economic solutions.
They are building physical supply chains, securing raw materials, and dealing strictly in the physical reality of resources, while the West tangles itself in ideological framing and algorithmic debates.
Therefore, the actionable steps for you regarding this data require profound, uncomfortable self-reflection.
First, you must rigorously evaluate the long-term trade-offs of your own lifestyle choices. Recognize that while our current cultural narrative aggressively pushes hyper-individualism and endless autonomy as the ultimate goals,
Human beings historically, biologically, and statistically find their deepest, most resilient satisfaction when they are heavily integrated into demanding core institutions like family, physical community, and faith.
second, you have to stop pathologizing the people who disagree with you. Stop calling the other side of the political aisle mentally ill, evil, or brainwashed.
Recognize that we're dealing with fundamentally different and often totally irreconcilable foundational worldviews.
You have to genuinely understand the mechanics of what the other side actually believes and why they believe it if you ever want to successfully navigate this reality.
Which perfectly sets up the final, ultimate question of this entire deep dive.
Lay it on me.
If the economy is a speculative bubble, if our information feeds are framed to manipulate us, if our pop culture is a hollow substitute for genuine religion, and if our hyper-individualistic choices are driving us toward demographic collapse and loneliness, how do we actually fix this?
How do we stop complaining about the fake world and actually build something real? To figure out how to build the future, we're going to look deep into the past.
Specifically, we are pulling from a fascinating history lesson by the King's Hall podcast regarding William of Orange and the Dutch War of Independence.
The historical account of William of Orange is a literal masterclass in what it actually takes, mechanically and physically, to build a resilient, real-world community against overwhelming, seemingly impossible odds. Let's set the stage.
In the late 1500s, William was a vastly wealthy nobleman. He had everything to lose, but the Spanish Habsburgs, under the rule of King Philip II, controlled the Netherlands. They began brutally persecuting Dutch Protestants and systematically trampling on local Dutch political rights.
William didn't just sit in his estate and write angry pamphlets. He didn't wait for the political climate to naturally shift in his favor. He took massive, decisive, physical action.
He stepped up to become the chief political, military, and financial leader of the Dutch Rebellion.
And this wasn't a symbolic leadership. He literally funded the Protestant resistance using his own vast personal fortune.
The financial mechanics of his sacrifice are astounding. He paid for armies of mercenaries out of his own pocket. He issued letters of marque to fund the sea beggars, essentially sanctioning privateers to harass the Spanish Navy.
He backed the sacred cause of his people until the physical reality of the war completely drained his accounts. He eventually went entirely bankrupt for the cause.
He put everything he materially possessed on the line to build a free reality for his people.
And, tragically, he didn't live to see the final victory. He was assassinated in 1584 by a fanatic loyal to the Spanish crown.
And there is a brutal historical irony here. The assassin shot William with pistols that he had purchased using charity money that William himself had mercifully given the man just days prior.
That is just heartbreaking. But William's death didn't end the movement, it catalyzed it. His son, Maurice of Nassau, stepped into the leadership role, and Maurice completely revolutionized the struggle by shifting from vision to pure competence.
This is the crucial pivot. William was a great visionary statesman, but he was a man of his era. He lived lavishly to keep up diplomatic appearances, which drained resources.
Right.
Maurice takes command, looks at the bankrupt estate and the grinding, ongoing war with the greatest empire on earth, and essentially says, we are done with the fancy dinners and the theoretical speeches.
Maurice professionalized everything. He focused obsessively on the mechanics of warfare. He standardized artillery calibers so logistics were easier.
He developed strict drill manuals so soldiers fired in disciplined volleys.
He focused on the grim economic efficiency of siegecraft to preserve the lives of his men while starving out the Spanish garrisons. He cut out all the lavish, expensive statesmanship of his father to focus purely on the practical, unglamorous mechanics of winning.
He made the visionary ideal physically practical.
And that transition from the visionary idealist who inspires the movement to the competent administrator who actually builds the structural reality is exactly how you build institutions that survive the scam economy.
This historical pivot connects perfectly to a modern conceptual framework discussed by commentators Paul Vanderklay and cognitive scientist John Vervaeke. They frequently reference a concept called tents versus temples.
Let's unpack the mechanics of that metaphor. Tents versus temples. What exactly does that mean for us today?
It is a metaphor for how we architect our communities, our businesses, and our institutions. Temples represent rigid, top-down, highly complex, deeply centralized structures.
Think of a massive stone cathedral or a massive corporate bureaucracy.
They look incredibly impressive, they project absolute authority, and they are meant to last forever. But because they are so structurally rigid and centralized, they are incredibly fragile.
They easily become corrupt, insulated from the ground truth, and if the cultural environment shifts, a temple cannot move. When a temple falls, it shatters completely.
Tents, on the other hand, represent adaptable, robust, decentralized, on-the-ground reality. A tent requires daily physical maintenance. You have to check the pegs and tighten the ropes.
But they are flexible. They bend in the wind instead of breaking. And crucially, if the environment becomes hostile or the ground shifts, you can pull up the pegs, pack up the tent, and move it to better ground.
Tents survive.
Tents represent living on the ground, dealing with actual reality, not just imposing top-down ideology. And we see this exact structural tension in how local communities govern themselves.
Another source we analyzed from Pastor Keith Foskey discussed the structural mechanics of a biblically functioning church. It serves as a perfect blueprint for trying to build an anti-fragile tent instead of a corruptible temple.
Foskey sharply critiques the modern prevalent CEO-pastor model. This is where a church is structured exactly like a modern corporate board, with the single, highly charismatic, powerful executive at the top making all the decisions.
Foskey argues that this structure is highly susceptible to the exact same scam economy mindset of hype, brand building, and eventual moral or financial collapse.
Instead, he advocates for a specific division of labor based on historical plurality.
The mechanics of this division are brilliant. You have a group called elders. These are a plurality of qualified men whose sole dedicated job is to steward the souls of the community. They handle the teaching, the prayer, and keeping the theological doctrines sound.
But crucially, they do not have absolute unchecked power over the physical operation, because alongside the elders, you have deacons.
I love the practical way Foskey phrased this division. If elders steward souls, deacons steward stuff.
Exactly. Deacons handle the unglamorous physical reality of the community. They manage the budgets, they maintain the facilities, they organize the charity distribution, they make sure the literal toilets flush and the roof doesn't leak.
This division of labor ensures that the lofty spiritual ideology of the elders is always tethered to the competent physical administration of the deacons. You absolutely cannot have a healthy, enduring community if the visionaries are completely detached from the people fixing the plumbing.
It all comes back to competence over pure ideology. We saw a brief but potent note in our sources from an interview with Florida Governor Ron DeSantis that perfectly illustrates this in the political sphere.
The interviewer noted a trend. Politicians generally fall into two distinct camps. You have low drama, highly competent administrators who unfortunately have weak, squishy ideologies and stand for nothing.
Or you have fiery, highly principled activists who give great speeches but are completely terrible at actually administering a government bureaucracy.
DeSantis' approach highlights the synthesis required to build the real. For example, he didn't just give speeches about classical education. He utilized the levers of government to physically set up the Hamilton Center at the University of Florida,
ensuring that classical Western education is structurally, financially protected within the state system. It shows that if you want your ideas to survive, you cannot just be an activist. You have to master the boring, complex administrative machinery of the system.
You have to be Maurice of Nassau, not just William of Orange.
You also have to be willing to do the hard work of bridging historical divides to build a stronger foundation. We saw a minor source from an intricate dialogue between scholars Nathan Jacobs and Dr. Jordan Cooper.
They are engaged in the difficult, deeply intellectual work of trying to bridge the massive theological gap between Eastern Orthodox and Western Christianity, trying to unite rigorous philosophy with historical theology.
Why does that matter? Because building a tent requires finding a robust, historical bedrock to drive your pegs into, especially in an age of constantly shifting digital sand.
It all distills down to one fundamental concept: agency. The defining characteristic of the people who succumb to the illusions we've discussed today is profound passivity.
They allow the algorithm to feed them anger. They allow the speculative scam economy to drain their wallets. They allow corporate pop culture to dictate their sense of meaning.
If we want to build the real, we must categorically reject passivity. We must move from the mindset of things happen to me to the mindset of I happen to things. William of Orange didn't wait for the Spanish to have a change of heart. He acted upon his reality.
So let's give you your final set of actionable steps. How do you take agency starting today? First, start extremely local. Start with your own household. Take absolute agency in your immediate physical life.
If there is a problem, a broken relationship with a sibling, a leaky faucet in the kitchen, a terrible financial habit, do not kick the can down the road. Put your hands on the wood and fix it.
Second, when you inevitably join a physical community, whether it's a church, a local charity, or a business venture, actively demand transparency and structural accountability.
Avoid organizations run by charismatic mini-potentates who operate with no checks and balances. Look for structures that favor the adaptability of the tent and the shared, grounded responsibility of elders and deacons.
And third, adopt a radically multi-generational mindset. Build physical skills, build ethical businesses, and build resilient communities that are explicitly designed to outlast you.
Stop thinking in terms of the frantic 24-hour algorithmic news cycle and start thinking in terms of what your great-grandchildren will inherit.
To summarize our massive journey today, we began by exposing the structural mechanics of the scam economy, where financial value has entirely detached from physical reality.
We navigated the digital hall of mirrors that is our algorithmically manipulated information ecosystem.
We examined the profound emptiness of treating corporate pop culture franchises as substitutes for genuine religion.
We looked unflinchingly at the stark, statistical realities of how our demographic and lifestyle choices are impacting human happiness.
And finally, by looking at the hard lessons of history, we saw that the ultimate antidote to all of this illusion is taking radical, competent agency to build resilient physical communities.
What an absolute marathon of a deep dive.
If any of these concepts, historical stories, or data points sparked an aha moment for you, please check out the links to the original sources in the show notes. We only scratched the surface of the mechanics here.
There is so much more depth to explore on these creators' channels, and they deeply deserve your extended attention.
I will leave you with this final thought to ponder. We spent a lot of time today dissecting the digital illusions, the intelligence psyops, and the systemic financial scams that surround us.
As technology accelerates, as AI gets infinitely better at generating synthetic video, synthetic text, and synthetic relationships, the digital world is going to become completely frictionless and infinitely abundant.
But consider this. Basic economics tells us that when something is infinitely abundant, its value drops to zero. Therefore, in the very near future, the ultimate luxury, the most valuable commodity a human being can possess, will not be digital access or a viral social media account.
The ultimate luxury will be unsimulated, physical scarcity.
True wealth will be defined by the analog reality you control. Owning a physical piece of land, building a piece of furniture with your own hands, or having an unrecorded offline conversation with a neighbor.
As the entire world rushes to upload itself into a perfectly simulated illusion, the ultimate act of rebellion and the true mark of wealth will simply be remaining undeniably, stubbornly real.
And maybe, just maybe, if you dedicate your life to building something physical, resilient, and true, the next time you lean against that wall on the street, it won't be painted cardboard. It will be real brick, and it will hold your weight. Thank you so much for joining us on your custom deep dive today. Stay curious, stay grounded, and we will catch you next time.